A name is named in the sexual harassment discussion at the statehouse, and lawmakers return next week to finish the veto session. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Lives are being affected to the State House. We'll talk about it with a couple of people who watch this stuff. Mike Lawrence is back. He is retired director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. He is former press secretary to Jim Edgar when he was governor and secretary of state, and a longtime reporter before that. Mike, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you and your viewers.
There you go. And Adam Rife is here again, anchor and reporter for WICS-TV here in Springfield.
Hi there, Bernie.
So, sexual harassment, there was talk about it. There was an open letter put out by and signed by, I guess, mostly women. We're talking about more than 200. It might be in the neighborhood of 300 as we speak, saying that there's kind of an atmosphere at the State House of harassment that has been not broadcast for a number of years, but with what's been going on nationally, with Harvey Weinstein in the film industry, people are saying, hey, women who work in and around the legislature shouldn't have to put up with this stuff. And then there was a hearing on a new law promoted by House Speaker Michael Madigan last week for kind of more regulation of this and training to make sure everybody understands what they're not supposed to do. And then there was testimony from a woman named Denise Rothheimer, and she said that for a long period of time she was harassed by State Senator Ira Silverstein from Chicago and had pages and pages of notes back and forth with clearly some inappropriate stuff. Mike, situation?
Well, I think for decades, if not longer, women in the Capitol building and in what I call the island of state government have had issues. If they're lobbyists, they have to worry about whether rebuffing advances and having legislation that they're advocating killed. If they're staff people, they're worried about their jobs. If they're fellow legislators, they have to worry about getting along in order to move legislation that they care about. So it's been there, and I do think the Weinstein revelations probably triggered what has come out, and Senator Silverstein has been removed from his leadership position in
which
the
was
Senate.
about $25,000, a little more than that, as a stipend on top of his $67,000 salary. He's just resigned from that.
But there's another a corollary issue is why these allegations that the woman had made through the really going back quite a ways weren't resolved or looked into, and that brought up the question of why the legislature has not filled the inspector general position for the legislature, because typically the inspector general would be the one to probe these kind of allegations.
That's right, and Adam, there's various people, candidates for attorney general and other legislators are saying we really need an inspector general. We haven't had a full-time one, I think, since 2014, and then when Tom Homer, former state rep, was it, and former judge, then he left the job. Bill Roberts of Springfield was put in on a part-time basis, just an hourly basis, but left it, I think, in 2015, and it's up to the legislative leaders. I guess there's a ethics commission with 2 members from each of the 4 caucuses, and they are supposed to then have the office running with an inspector general. That just hasn't been there. All the other major parts of state government have inspectors general. The governor, there's one for the governor's office. There's one for each of the constitutional officers, like the treasurer and the comptroller. Interestingly, but the legislature hasn't had one, and President Cullerton, for one, who apparently heard about these allegations against Senator Silverstein some time ago and then referred them to somebody like that, President Cullerton even said, well, he takes some of the blame for not having that position filled, as the legislative leaders must fill it, and they hope to have it by next week. And they're even going to have some sexual harassment training for senators when they return for the veto session this week. Adam, changing the culture, or just looking bad for a while and going to get more political hits?
Well, I think you have to do something, but it's been swift action in the past few days. Is it enough to take care of the issue that this woman brought forth? No. I mean, this has been reported more than a year ago, as she mentioned. So a lot of the times when something like this happens, an open secret or whether it's under the table, if we've known about it for decades, people will wonder, well, why did nobody ever say anything about it? That's not always a fair question, but in this case, she did. She did report it and went to an office that, as you mentioned, didn't have anybody holding that legislative inspector general position. There's also the ethics committee that can also look into it, but there's no real teeth that they have to act on it. They can't really take any action, which is another issue that I think will be addressed when you have a vacancy at the top, as we've had for 3 years.
And I think some of this legislation that's being put forward would make sure that sexual harassment is one of the things that can be viewed as a problem.
You know, as you know, Bernie and Adam, you probably are aware of this too. You know, legislators have never been real excited about investigations of legislators.
That would make some sense, yes.
And I remember when attorneys general for years would propose these statewide grand juries, and the legislature balked at that because they did not want to empower an attorney general to look at the legislature. So
interesting.
There's a long history.
Clearly, by the documents that the Denise Rothheimer, who was trying to get legislation passed and had passed a bill in the name of her daughter, who had been assaulted as a young girl, and was seeking further victims kind of legislation. Just to put it in the correct perspective, even she did not say there was anything physical that Senator Silverstein did, but it was calls late at night, some inappropriate comments. There was clearly back and forth on Facebook. She said that it made her very tense and made her lose 20 pounds and her hair came out. She said this at a hearing, which Barbara Flynn Curry was sitting next to her, who was the majority leader in the House, and Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, and they were, looking at her, and you could see it in the video. And Speaker Madigan said afterwards, they didn't know about this. Senator Silverstein has said he, didn't think he did anything wrong, but apologizes if he had a problem, but let the ethics process work itself out. That's where we are. And just as an aside, it's an interesting and difficult situation. He's kind of a significant political family in Chicago because he's a state senator and his wife Deborah is an alderman in the city of Chicago. Right. So it's not just, whatever, nobody, it's kind of. So it is what it is, and again, the culture in so many institutions in our country are undergoing self-examination in this way, and the legislature and the legislative process will be one of them. We've all probably got stories of things we've seen, but
I think it was telling when Representative Chapelevia mentioned during that hearing, she asked for a show of hands, and we didn't see it from the feed, but she said there were quite a few hands up from women and men, and as Mike mentioned, this affects not just legislators, not just staffers, not just lobbyists, but all of them. All of these people are coming forward, whether it was in letters or testimony or anonymous comments, saying, yes, this has been going on for quite a while. So something needs to change. I think next week will be a big mover for not only this bill, but addressing just a better system of addressing this.
Yeah, and it's difficult for people to figure out how to deal with, because everything you say about this on television and elsewhere can certainly be charged. There's a recent kind of a new member of the House named Stephen Reich. He's in his 60s. Recently got in the legislature, I think, when Jack Franks left to become McHenry County administrator and or president, whatever. And he said, well, it's really up to women to name names, and all men shouldn't be viewed as the perpetrators here. That's unfair. And he initially put out a statement, or said to a reporter somewhere, that I think it was actually a statement that he wrote, I'm not going to go through this training if we have it. Well, then within a day, he changed his view and said, okay, I still think the process has to be fair. Not everybody is at fault, but I will go through training. So
I thought it was such a tone-deaf initial statement to say, I'm not going through this because I haven't been an offender in the past. I think he's completely missing the point. I look at this training, effective training that has a purpose, that has a goal, that's effective in the way it's implemented in any place, the state capitol, our place of business, anywhere you work. If it's effective training, I look at it as herd immunity. You're not only addressing maybe some issues that have happened in the past, you're not only rehabilitating some offenders or addressing the infliction that they've already done, but you're creating this herd immunity for the future. You're creating this atmosphere that's no longer accepting or welcoming to this behavior. So for Representative Rife to say, I'm not taking this because I haven't been implicated or because I don't know anyone who's been implicated, I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, if you have proper training going forward, you're going to make the state capitol, slowly but surely, you hope, a place that's no longer welcoming to any type of sexual harassment.
Right.
That's the goal.
And it's interesting, a lot of companies do this. Our newspaper has done this for a time.
And granted, they're not always effective. He
I will
mentioned
say,
that.
you watch videos and you answer questions.
Right.
And it's a mandatory thing
Right.
year to year. And I've got to say, and what's positive about it, you do get an idea, and certainly you hope people get the idea of what's allowed and what's not. And over time, you just keep hoping those videos get better. But anyway, at the way they present it, so it's not so corny. But it's a serious topic, and they have ones on ethics too. And it's an interesting process to go through, and it's different from decades ago. And I can, but society is changing in this direction. And again, training gets better, and hopefully people get the message. Veto session is coming, so the governor should be returning from Israel. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there are a couple issues. There may be another vote on bump stocks. It's that device. Marty Moylan is a state representative a Democrat from suburban Chicago, Des Plaines, I believe, who tried to get a ban on bump stocks in Illinois. It turned out that gun owners, Democrat and Republican, spoke up in the House and said, this bill is way too broad. It could make illegal like half of the guns that people own, because anything that changes the trigger could, or enhances trigger motion, could be considered illegal. Are we going to see that? Are we going to see another vote perhaps on right-to-work zones? There was a ban on right-to-work zones locally. The governor vetoed that because he wants local communities to be able to do that. Again, it was Representative Moylan who fell one vote short on overriding that veto. Any particular things of interest to look for?
Well, they may try to run that again. They have an opportunity to do it. As you said, it was one vote
right,
short.
and this on the right-to-work thing.
On the right-to-work issue. We'll see. Even if it does not go, if it's not overridden, it's going to be another issue that the Democrats are going to use in 2018 to spank up the union vote.
Right.
And they may not need it all that much, but
Governor Rauner clearly has shown that at least certainly public sector unions he is not a fan of, and that really has, unions even back in 2016 when he won said, he's woken the beast or whatever. Well, people are probably more intense now union-wise, although there are fewer union people in Illinois now than there used to be, and there's more anti-union sentiment along with some pro-union sentiment.
And that's why this could go forward. And similarly, I think that bump stock legislation, probably too broad on purpose, perhaps. Maybe that was a tactic to start the conversation. But with 3 days to go, I think they were talking about backing off some of the criminalization elements of that bill and just sticking to the bump stock specifically, maybe narrowing it and seeing if that goes. But when we look at some of the big battles that the governor has left, political battles, right to work is probably, and maybe that in Janus, you could go back and forth, but certainly with the unions, that's the big one now that we've wrapped up the budget, education funding, some major things like that. So I think it'll certainly, if not the legislation, I think the conversation certainly.
I guess I'd be surprised if they pass a gun control measure, even if that bill is narrowed.
Right, and there was another bill put up by Representative Wheeler just dealing with bump stocks as opposed to any trigger altering device. But you're right, Illinois hasn't necessarily gone that way. The NRA is strong, but it's not really a partisan thing. Chicago has always been very pro-gun control, but downstate has always been a hunting place. and Jerry Costello the second from, and he's got a big shooting,
The Sparta.
the Sparta shooting
yeah.
complex, which is a state of
Right.
Illinois facility in his district, and he talked about rapid fire is necessary, and everybody uses certain devices on their guns. Or I guess many of these sports shooters use devices. He said, you're going to make criminals out of them. So you're right. We haven't been a gun control state in a while. While the city of Chicago used to be, and then it was actually a Supreme Court case out of the city of Chicago that allowed people to have guns in their homes there because they used to ban that. So things have moved on. Politically speaking, the governor also now has an opponent in Jean Ives. She is a Republican state representative from Wheaton. She was unhappy with the governor signing House Bill 40, which will allow Medicaid paid abortions, so public paid abortions. The governor had said he would veto that bill and then signed it. So she is now, she's actually put out 2 sets of petitions. One had Rich Morthland, a former state rep from Cordova, which is I think near the Quad Cities.
Right.
Is her running mate. Apparently they had his address wrong by a number in one set of petitions, so they've had to put it out twice. Not the greatest way to start a campaign, but she and many other social conservatives say we want an alternative to Governor Rauner. How far do we think this will go? This is certainly a thorn in the governor's side.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that everyone would think about is, does she have the money to keep up with him? I think at the time that she announced she was going to run, or at least explore, is maybe $32,000 or $35,000 in a war chest. It's not going to hold up very long. But what we did see quickly was some mobilization from social conservative groups, I think. And as we move forward, if she doesn't get their backing specifically, more groups, we are seeing many more going against the governor. So I think there's 2 sides to that. There's people backing Jeannie Ives, and there's also people going against the governor over that specific issue. So certainly building some momentum on that
Mike,
conservative side.
I think it's, as Adam indicated, it's been proven over time, if you have a good grassroots movement, and certainly like the pro-life movement, you can get stuff done without a lot of money. Although the governor, as we know, put $50 million into his own campaign. Ken Griffin, a friend of his, put another $20 million. I mean, he's got like $70 million. Illinois is on track to be possibly the most expensive governor's race in the country ever next year, partly because one of the Democrats is J.B. Pritzker, who is a billionaire 3 times over. But social conservatives, may make Jean Ives give it a go, but we don't really know yet if it's going to be a serious challenge, do we?
Well, I agree with Adam. The first thing to look at is how much money she can raise. If she's not going to raise enough to compete dollar for dollar, not even close. But if she is unable to attract significant financial support, she may look at running for re-election to the House instead of proceeding. I think one thing to keep in mind, and I think Rauner would be the odds-on favorite to win a battle for the nomination, but I wouldn't pay close attention at all to what the polls show, because in Illinois primaries, particularly Republican primaries, the pro-life forces, the social conservative forces, the candidate they back is usually in the teens when they poll, but on primary election day, that candidate will be somewhere in the low 30s.
Right. Steve Baer was a pro-life candidate against Jim Edgar, your former boss, and got 30% a couple of times.
Yeah.
In that range, right?
Yeah, and there's a history of that. I mean, that is a built-in vote. The far right has a disproportionate influence in the Republican primary. To their credit, they get out and vote. And they have passion where moderates, by their nature, don't get that revved up, and a lot of them, for one reason or another, don't get involved in primaries. But again, she would be a very long shot, and my memory may be faulty here, but I believe the last Illinois governor who was denied nomination was Dan Walker, and that was in 1976.
It's been a while.
Now, since then we have had challenges. Pat Quinn got challenged by Dan Hines of fellow state office holders, and Pat won that primary. It is very difficult to defeat an incumbent governor in a primary, even if that governor is not a billionaire or a near billionaire.
Gotcha. Speaking of Pat Quinn, in the last week, it was right at the end of last week, he announced through Michael Sneed, the columnist in the Chicago Sun-Times, that he is going to run for Attorney General or seriously considering a run for Attorney General as a Democrat. Of course, he's been state treasurer. He ran for U.S. Senate. He ran for Secretary of State, didn't win those. He had a Cook County position for a while on the Tax Appeals Board. He's been lieutenant governor and governor. But he joins a giant field, including Jesse Ruiz, Nancy Rotering, Kwame Raoul, Sharon Farrelly, Scott Drury, state rep, Aaron Goldstein, lawyer, Renato Mariotti, who announced on MSNBC, where he commentates, and he's a former prosecutor from Chicago. What would Pat Quinn mean getting into this thing, Adam? Any thoughts?
I'm glad you have the list because I cannot keep it straight at
right,
this point.
and that might be to Pat Quinn's advantage because most people know him and not those other people.
Exactly. I mean, he has the
Raoul,
name
of course,
appeal.
is a state senator.
He's probably looking at that list of his resume and going, "What haven't I done yet?" and taking a shot at this. But I think he's going to be an easy target. Representative Drury, I think, was one of them, and several others just came out quickly and said, if you want to do the same old, you've got Pat Quinn here as an option. So I think it's going to be tough to separate himself, even though he does have that name recognition.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you and I have been watching Pat Quinn for years, since he was with Dan Walker, and also the cutback amendment that he spearheaded through his Coalition for Political Honesty, gathering signatures, cutting the size of the Illinois House from 177 to 118. After the 1978 pay raise, which they went, the 40% pay raise from 20,000 to 28. But as governor, and in a race against Rauner in 2016, some bad stuff came out. There was patronage hiring going on at IDOT. There were like the $50 million anti-violence program in Chicago that was given to various groups and not well accounted for. Wouldn't those things possibly hurt the entire Democratic ticket if he's the nominee for Attorney General?
Yeah, I think he definitely has vulnerabilities that could spread to other candidates on the ticket. But, you know, it's a well-known name.
He's a good campaigner. He knows the state.
As you indicated, Bernie, he's run any number of times. He's won some, he's lost some. And, you know, occasionally he'll come out and be his populist self and push for term limits. And I once said, I wonder if Pat would like to limit the number of times somebody could run for office. Now, somehow I don't think he'd support that.
There's one thing I know for sure. If he gets in the race, we're going to hear the term paycheck to paycheck a lot.
Right.
Because he's always run on behalf and represented people who live paycheck to paycheck.
Buy stock in purple ties.
Governor Rauner has been in Israel for the past several days. They've announced at least 4, and there's University of Illinois officials with him. They've announced some agreements to work together in education and research. The last one I saw was Ben Gurion University of the Negev, a memo of understanding to work together on those things. See, the governor had also been to Asia before, and I'm not sure that they came back with particular agreements. Than Israel, they seem to have set it up better, so they're saying we've got some things that we can announce while we're even over there. Any thoughts about how Rauner is selling the state as an international traveler, himself on his own dime and U of I on theirs, is going?
I suppose, you know, looking at the receipts, if we're not paying for it, it doesn't hurt. But are these trips going to get your brother, cousin, sister to move back from out of state? Probably not. I mean, when we look at what's being produced out of these trips, much like the Asian trip that we had a couple months ago, unless there are jobs that are brought here specifically, unless he gets a hard commitment from somebody to build a factory, you know, this is a pretty good PR trip for him. Now, it may come that this down the road develops something, but for the time being, I just look at it as adding to the list of places he's been so that he can say at one point next year, maybe in October or November, I've been to all these places pushing Illinois, working hard for you.
I think there's a potential in this Innovation Institute that they're talking about in Chicago, where
U of I and U of C and Northwestern,
Sure.
and putting together a lot of
so that, I think that could be a potential job creator. But, you know, the fact is he hasn't accomplish much of what he said he was going to accomplish in terms of dealing with the legislature. In a way, what he's doing now is similar to what presidents have done through the years when they decide to do things in foreign policy where they don't need, at least immediately, to have the Congress. And whatever Rauner can do without the legislature is something he's going to look hard at doing.
Well, one thing he just did late in the week is announce that he wants Illinois to be open to Puerto Rican refugees, and told the Illinois Emergency Management Agency to work with the federal emergency agency and say, if we can house refugees here, I think they get reimbursed. That's a kind and gentle thing to do, is it not?
Makes him look good, doesn't it?
We'll see where that goes. And so it's just, he didn't want Syrian refugees, although that was a completely different situation.
Right.
This was these are hurricane victims, and they are American citizens, so it's a different thing. I should also mention that there was a new video put out this week, speaking of high-spending campaigns. Daniel Biss put out something that looked like a drug ad saying, to fight big spending billionaire syndrome, vote for me. And don't vote for Biss if you want, the rich guys to get richer, but vote for me if you want the little guy represented. We'll see how that goes over. He's trying to fight some higher dollar campaigns for Democratic nomination for governor, and we'll see how it goes. That's about it for this week. Mike Lawrence and Adam Rife, thanks for the conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.